I stood at the edge of the grave, half watching the preacher's mouth move while my breath misted faintly in the October chill. Elmwood Cemetery was always quiet, too quiet. The kind of stillness that made you feel the weight of every mistake you'd ever made. My fingers clutched the funeral program with Raymond's face printed too young, too smiling. A man who'd stopped smiling long before he stopped breathing. And then, my phone buzzed. I felt it in my coat pocket, faint against the wool lining. I shouldn't have looked. But my hand moved before my mind caught up. A single message lit the screen, from an unknown 313 number. I'm alive? I'm not in the coffin? The ground tilted. The wind didn't blow, it howled. A low, mean gust that cut past my collar and straight through my chest. I blinked, my pulse roaring in my ears, louder than Reverend Tillman's words, louder than the rustling oaks. My daughter Danielle leaned in just then, her tone brisk and hushed. We should hurry. There's a reading afterward. She slipped her hand into the crook of my elbow like a stage cue, guiding me away from the grave as if I were the one needing support. But all I could think was, who sent that message? Raymond was gone. I saw him in that hospital bed. I signed the papers. I pressed my lips to his forehead before they zipped the bag. And now, here I stood, less than 5 feet from his coffin, wooden, oak-stained, closed, and someone was telling me he wasn't inside. I looked back once as the casket was lowered. The ropes moved with smooth finality, like this whole day had been practiced. Danielle had already begun ushering people toward the cars. My son Maurice gave me a distant wave, one of those half-hearted things you throw when you want to look respectful without getting involved. I tucked the phone into my purse and swallowed the scream trying to claw its way up. As the crowd thinned, the funeral director, Mr. Terrence Rhodes, kind and slow-spoken, approached me gently. "Let me know if you need anything, Mrs. Carter." His voice was sincere. He didn't know. I nodded. "Thank you." But I was no longer standing in grief. I was standing in suspicion. Whoever had texted me knew something. And I would find out. Because if my husband wasn't in that coffin, someone else was. And if Danielle and Maurice had hurried to rush this along, maybe the only thing buried here was the truth. The 17 bus rolled east along Gradiot, its windows fogged from breath and weather, the kind of October chill that seeped into your bones if you weren't moving. I sat 2 rows behind the driver, watching 7 Mile draw closer, my neighborhood, my reality, growing more distorted with each passing block. The obituary card was still in my hand, soft around the edges from too much touching. Raymond's smile stared up at me, younger than he had any right to be, the same photo Danielle chose without asking me. Danielle and Maurice didn't ride back with me. They'd said they had family errands, not our family, theirs. That made all the difference. I leaned my head against the window, the bus lurching slightly at the lights. At first, I tried to remember the last real conversation I'd had with Raymond. Not the hospice whispers or the morphine confusion. I meant a real conversation, where his eyes were clear and his hands still reached for mine without prompting. I couldn't remember it, and that blank space filled with dread. Not grief, not yet, but something colder. I kept thinking about that message. I'm alive. I'm not in the coffin. Anonymous, untraceable. Just a Detroit area code and a gut punch. It hadn't said who was texting, but whoever it was had picked the cruelest moment to drop that kind of madness into my life. Or maybe the most strategic. The bus screeched to a halt at Conant, and I clutched my purse tighter, feeling the shape of my phone through the lining. No follow-up text, no name, just that single heart-hollowing sentence. I didn't want to believe it, but I couldn't unsee it either. When I reached my block, Hickory Street, lined with half-leaning mailboxes and porch lights that flickered like old ghosts, I climbed down slowly. The air smelled like wet leaves and engine oil, familiar, ordinary, but my world no longer felt like mine. I'd lived 59 years in Detroit, taught middle school for 32 of them, buried my mother, my brother, and now, supposedly, my husband. I knew grief. I knew paperwork and pensions, and how to manage when folks pretended not to see you. But I didn't know how to handle this. And maybe that was the first time I really understood something had shifted. that I was no longer in mourning, I was on alert. I still made dinner that evening. Some habits, once stitched into the fabric of your life, refuse to unravel just because the world tilts. Turkey wings, slow roasted the way Raymond liked them, with fat slabs of onion and enough seasoning to remind you someone cared. Yams, too, baked with brown sugar and a pat of butter tucked beneath the skin. The smell curled through the house like memory. Raymond hadn't eaten solid food in 3 weeks before he passed, but cooking for him hadn't stopped me then. It didn't stop me now. I set a plate at his old spot, same as always, and poured sweet tea into the tall green glass he claimed made it taste better. The chair across from me stayed empty, but I couldn't bear to sit on his side. That would feel like an erasure. I left the television off. The silence wasn't comforting, but it was honest. I ate slowly, chewing until the food turned soft enough to swallow past the lump in my throat. On the kitchen wall, the 1991 wedding photo hung slightly crooked. I stared at it as I chewed. Me in that lace dress I'd picked out myself, refusing anyone else's opinion. Raymond holding my hand like a man who knew exactly what he had. We'd been proud, stubborn, in love, and full of plans that mostly turned into bills and favors for everybody but us. Still, it had meant something. After I cleared the plates, I sat down at the little table in the corner of the kitchen and pulled out my phone. I scrolled back through the last thread of messages from Raymond. The last one was from 2 weeks before he passed. Love you. Be strong. Don't let them run you over. I'd thought he meant the cancer, the pain, the slow dying. Now I wasn't sure. I glanced at the grocery receipt still lying on the counter. $48.17 from the family fare on Harper. Mostly basics. A few things I'd picked up to keep the house full, as if that might coax some kind of peace back into it. But peace couldn't be bought in plastic bags. I looked around the kitchen, the worn linoleum, the warm hum of the refrigerator. This house had always been loud with Raymond's voice, with life. Now it just held questions. By the next morning, my hands needed something to do. Grief had always made me restless. But this wasn't grief anymore. This was tension. I didn't cry when I laced up my walking shoes, or when I pulled out the keys to the storage unit Raymond and I had shared for nearly 9 years. I just moved. That's how I've always coped, by moving. U-Store self-storage sat off Gradient, tucked behind a faded Marathon station and 2 boarded-up storefronts. The place looked exactly as I remembered. Brown metal doors, keypad gate, motion lights that flickered, like they were scared to stay on too long. Raymond had picked the location because it was, quote, close enough to reach, far enough to forget. We'd kept everything in there, from old holiday boxes to his high school yearbooks, to the few things we couldn't bear to part with after his mother passed. I hadn't been in over 2 months, not since his diagnosis worsened. I keyed in our old code, his birthday backward, easy to remember, and walked to Unit 126. But when I reached it, the familiar blue lockbox was gone. Gone. Not open. Not broken. Gone. I stood there, blinking, like maybe it would appear if I stared long enough. Then I pulled out my phone and texted Danielle. Me. Did you go to the storage unit? Danielle, we cleared it out for you. You're welcome. I stared at those 3 final words until they blurred. You're welcome. I went straight to the office, heart thumping with a kind of cold clarity that felt nothing like morning. Tasha, the front desk clerk, a round-faced girl with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense tone, tapped at her keyboard after I gave her our unit number. She tilted the screen toward me. Last access was September 30th. Danielle Carter signed in with her own code. Said she was listed on the account. She wasn't, I said flatly. Tasha shrugged. Well, she had the right form. Looked legit. I thanked her and walked out with the echo of metal doors closing behind me. The unit had been prepaid until March 2026. Raymond had taken care of that. He always planned ahead. So why would Danielle swoop in days before his funeral and gut it without telling me? By the time the sun reached its highest, I was elbow deep in manila folders and the sharp smell of old paper. The dining table, long cleared for dinners and family gatherings, had become a battlefield, an archive. I pulled out every receipt, invoice, and canceled check I'd ever kept since Raymond's diagnosis. My fingertips turned dusty from the folder edges, but my mind stayed clear. I needed to know what I'd actually spent. Not just time, not just energy, dollars, cents, numbers that couldn't lie. There had been so much appointments at St. Joseph's, his 3-night stay at Detroit Mercy Medical, the private hospice nurse, when the pain got too much for either of us to pretend anymore. Every cost came with a receipt, and I had saved them all. Not for taxes, not for proof. I kept them because I needed to see the math of my sacrifice. Danielle had once said, smug in her polished tone, "Dad wouldn't want you worrying. Let us take over now." That was 6 months ago, right around the time Raymond lost the ability to walk without help. But even then, takeover had mostly meant showing up late and offering opinions no one asked for. They never paid. Not once. Not a prescription. Not a meal. The stack of documents grew until I couldn't see the wood grain of the table anymore. My hands cramped as I totaled each category: hospice care, mobility aids, medications, dietary supplements, home modifications, transportation, and uncountable grocery runs. The number I landed on made me sit back hard in the chair. $62,400. $62,400. From my retirement. From savings Raymond and I had built, dollar by dollar, over 40 years. I'd put it all on the line so he could have a shred of dignity in his final year. So why did Danielle act like she'd done me a favor? I found my notebook, the one I always kept tucked in the drawer with the good pens, and began listing every major expense, date, and vendor. I wanted a clean trail, not out of paranoia, out of clarity, because something told me I'd need it soon. Grief can make you forget, but paper remembers, and mine was finally in order. Early Sunday morning, I walked into Huntington Bank with the weight of those figures pressing on my spine. The glass doors parted with a mechanical sigh, letting in a draft that carried the metallic scent of ATM ink and cold coffee. The lobby was quiet, no one ahead of me. Good. I approached the teller, a young woman whose name tag read Cherie. She greeted me with the polite blandness of someone trained to smile through grief, even if they didn't understand it. "I need to check on a deposit," I said, sliding over my account details. "My husband had a life insurance policy. It should have cleared by now." Cherie tapped for a moment, then frowned. "Can I ask who the policy was through?" "Sun Unity Life." She nodded, typed again. "Actually, it shows the deposit already processed, October 1st, for $75,000. But it went to an external account." My lips parted, but no words came out. "What account?" I finally asked, my voice more gravel than sound. She turned her screen slightly. I didn't recognize the routing number. Not mine, not ours. "Is there anyone else listed as a joint beneficiary?" she asked gently. "There shouldn't be," I said, and meant it. "Raymond named me. He did that years ago." Cherie hesitated. "You might want to speak to someone in management. This looks like a recent update." I stood there for a beat, pulse hammering in my neck, then followed her to a glass-walled office near the back. Ms. Arlene Tate, the branch manager, rose as I entered. She was a woman in her 50s with a silk blouse and firm handshake, someone who looked like she'd seen worse and was no stranger to cover-ups gone wrong. I explained everything: Raymond's death, the expected payout, my confusion. She pulled up the file and, after a few clicks, sighed. The policy's beneficiary was changed on September 14th. It's now listed under a new name, D. Carter. My stomach clenched. That's my daughter. She submitted an updated beneficiary form, digital signature. Everything appeared valid. But if you believe this was done without your knowledge, it was. Miss Tate nodded slowly. Then we may be looking at fraud. I didn't sleep that night. Not deeply, anyway. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment from the past month with new eyes. Everything I'd brushed off, the rushed funeral planning, the closed casket, Danielle's insistence on handling things, clicked together like puzzle pieces I hadn't known were missing. At 5:15 a.m., I was already seated at the small desk in the home office, the one Raymond used to call his corner of the world. The light above buzzed faintly, casting a cone of warmth over a stack of files. I powered up his old laptop, a bulky Dell he'd refused to replace, and searched for the folder marked Insurance, Sun Unity. There it was. Nestled between tax returns and a copy of his will. The PDF was dated September 12th, 2 days before the new beneficiary had been registered. I opened it, and there it was, the change of beneficiary form, signed electronically, under my name, but they'd gotten it wrong. Whoever signed it had used the wrong middle initial. I stared at the name, Renee J. Carter. My name is Renee G. Carter. That slip, it punched straight through my confusion and landed in the pit of my stomach like a rock. Someone had tried to become me, but didn't know me well enough to get it right. The forged signature mimicked my handwriting poorly, like someone had copied from a check. The loops were too narrow, the tail of the R cut off abruptly. Even the form itself looked like it had been downloaded from a template and altered with editing software. I knew, because Raymond and I had filled out the original one together, pen in hand, at our dining table 5 years ago. I clicked the Properties tab. The document had been created on a Mac. Danielle used a MacBook. I remembered, because she always brought it over in a gold case and complained about our ancient tech. I printed the file, then printed the old one I'd saved as well. Real signature beside the forgery. I placed them side by side on the desk, staring at the evidence. This wasn't carelessness. This wasn't grief. This was calculated theft. By mid-afternoon, I needed answers I couldn't find in documents. The funeral had come together too quickly, too neatly. There'd been no viewing, no autopsy. And for the first time since that text at Elmwood, I allowed myself to ask a question I had buried under disbelief. Was that really Raymond in that coffin? Daniels & Sons Funeral Home was a red brick building with black awnings and a reputation for discretion. I'd chosen them because Mr. Rhodes had been kind when my mother passed, and I thought kindness would carry me through. Now I wondered what else they'd carried. Mr. Rhodes met me in the front office, a tidy space filled with white lilies and low jazz. He wore a charcoal suit and the same soft voice he used at the cemetery. But this time, I wasn't here for comfort. "Mr. Rhodes," I said, setting my purse down, "I need to ask about the identification process. Who confirmed Raymond's body?" He looked surprised, then wary. "Your daughter, Danielle. She said you were too overwhelmed. She provided his ID and signed the release herself." "She signed it as his spouse?" "Yes," he said, hesitating. "Was that incorrect?" "I'm his wife, legally. Danielle isn't authorized to sign anything on my behalf." He frowned, turning toward the file cabinet behind him. "She had all the documentation. It looked legitimate. Did your staff visually confirm the body's identity?" He paused, then lowered his voice. "No, ma'am. Danielle declined a public viewing and requested direct cremation. Said the family didn't want an open casket. Was fingerprinting or dental verification done?" "No," he said quietly. "That's not standard unless requested. She signed the cremation authorization herself. I want to see that form." He opened the drawer, pulled the file, and laid it on the desk. I recognized the handwriting instantly. It wasn't mine. The loops were careful but unfamiliar, the letters too upright. And the date, September 29th, 3 days before the service. The authorization page had a scribbled signature next to a checked box, spouse, authorizing party. Mr. Rhodes ran a hand down his tie, avoiding my eyes. "Mrs. Carter, if you believe something improper happened—" "I don't believe," I said, picking up the form and sliding it into my purse. "I know." He didn't argue. Instead, he said, "There's footage. Security cameras in the intake room. I'll release it to you, with your request in writing." I nodded. "You'll have it today." That evening, the sky turned the kind of steel gray that makes you feel like something's coming, even if the forecast says otherwise. I dressed in a soft navy sweater Raymond once called my serious look, tied my scarf neatly, and drove to Danielle's home in West Bloomfield. I didn't call ahead. Some truths don't need scheduling. The neighborhood was polished, all manicured lawns and tasteful porch lights. I stood at their door, heart steady but fists clenched, with the cremation form folded neatly in my coat pocket. Danielle opened the door like she'd been expecting company, all smiles and soft concern. "Mama, you should have called. Come in." I stepped inside. Their living room was warm, staged like a lifestyle ad. Gray sectional, candles lit, throw pillows arranged just so. Maurice sat on the edge of the armchair, eyes darting. Neither of them asked why I was there. I pulled the paper from my pocket and laid it on their coffee table. Danielle's smile faltered. "I went to Daniels & Sons," I said. "Asked who identified Raymond's body. They said you did, that you signed as spouse." Her hand twitched. "You were in no state to handle the logistics. We thought No, I cut in. You didn't think. You decided. There's a difference. Maurice tried to play peacemaker. Mama, you're upset. This grief, it's making you spiral a little. That word, spiral, landed like a slap. I'm not spiraling. I'm paying attention. And what I'm finding is theft, forgery, lies. I pulled out a small recorder from my purse and hit the button. So let's be clear. Anything you say now is going on record. Danielle laughed, too quickly. Are you recording us? Mama, this isn't healthy. I found the forged insurance form too, the one changing the beneficiary. Signed with the wrong middle initial. Maurice leaned forward, all performative concern. You need to talk to someone, Mama. This kind of paranoia isn't new. Remember last year when you said the neighbors were stealing your mail? I stared at him. That was a stolen check, and I reported it. You both know I'm not confused. Danielle's tones softened, sweetened like syrup. We're just worried, that's all. You've been through a lot. Maybe you're remembering things wrong. Gaslight served warm. I hit stop on the recorder. That's enough, I said. I stood. You're going to hear from someone who is confused, but not about the law. By 2 a.m., I was wide awake, sitting on the edge of my bed, in a robe I hadn't worn since Raymond's last hospital stay. The room was dim, lit only by the streetlight bleeding through the blinds. I couldn't sleep. But I wasn't restless. I was resolved. I opened my laptop and searched my email history for Angela Holloway. She'd been Raymond's probate attorney, sharp as glass and twice as clear. He met her through the church's men's group 5 years ago when he helped with their estate planning seminar. Said she reminded him of our niece Simone. Smart, no-nonsense, and unwilling to let people talk in circles. I liked her from the start. I found her address and began typing. Subject, urgent, Carter Estate. Dear Ms. Holloway, I hope this message finds you well. I'm reaching out with concern regarding several actions taken following the death of my husband, Raymond Carter. I have reason to believe the named beneficiaries of his accounts have been altered without my knowledge or consent. Additionally, legal documents concerning his cremation were falsified. I am attaching scanned copies of both the forged insurance form and the cremation authorization, as well as audio from a recent conversation with my children. I would appreciate an opportunity to speak with you as soon as possible. I am no longer comfortable assuming goodwill from my family. Sincerely, Renee G. Carter 1 attached the files, double-checked the tone, and hit send. Then I took a screenshot of the message and texted it to Danielle without comment. Her reply came at 2:09 a.m. Danielle. Mom, what are you doing? Don't trust the children? Really? You're breaking this family. I stared at her words, don't trust the children, and felt a pang, but not regret, more like confirmation. The kind of ache you feel when your spine straightens after being bent too long. Raymond had warned me, hadn't he? In that final text, don't let them run you over. He must have known something. The ceiling fan hummed above me as I sat back, phone resting on my thigh, the bedroom cloaked in stillness. This wasn't fear anymore. It was focus. The next morning, I walked into Huntington Bank again, this time without hesitation. Ms. Tate, the branch manager, greeted me with a professional nod, though her expression shifted when she saw the stack of documents in my hand. I need to lock down every joint account linked to my husband's name, I said, placing the papers on her desk. Freeze any active transfers and restrict all third-party access, especially under Danielle Carter or Maurice Carter. She didn't blink. Do you believe there's ongoing misuse of funds? I met her gaze directly. I know there is. Ms. Tate guided me through the process, step by step. We flagged the life insurance payout as a fraudulent redirection, pulled logs from September to track suspicious access points, and established a new PIN for my online banking. She issued a lockout notice on all shared access profiles. She printed a confirmation. Case IDDU 35439, filed under suspected identity fraud, beneficiary tampering, and elder coercion. As she handed it to me, she paused. Mrs. Carter, this isn't small. I'm not small, I said. They just forgot. While we processed the documents, my phone vibrated in my purse. I let it ring once, twice, then silenced it. I already knew who it was. When I finally checked it an hour later, the message flashed from Danielle. Did you just stop the transfer? We're drowning here. That money wasn't just yours. I stared at the words. We're drowning. Like I hadn't spent $62,000 trying to keep Raymond's head above water while they offered nothing but opinions and absence. Like they had some moral claim to my future because they shared a last name. I didn't reply. Instead, I walked back to my car, buckled in, and rested the fraud packet on the passenger seat like it was sacred. Because to me, it was. This was the paper trail that proved I hadn't imagined it, that I hadn't been paranoid or confused. They had moved like predators, slowly at first, then with speed. I had moved like prey. Until now. Danielle wanted to talk about drowning. Let her. By 3:30 that afternoon, I had claimed a table in the back corner of the Jefferson branch of the Detroit Public Library. The good corner, the one near the outlet and the printer with toner that still worked. I'd brought everything with me. The forged forms, the insurance policies, the binder from the hospice folder, a fresh USB drive, and enough highlighters to color code an uprising. Miss Rhonda, the librarian, recognized me right away. She'd been at Cornerstone Baptist since before Raymond got sick and always asked about his health whenever I came in. Today she didn't ask. She just looked at the folders in my arms and the hard line of my mouth and said, "Printer's working. Copier too. Let me know if you need extra paper." I did. I printed out every email between me and Sun Unity Life, every statement from Huntington Bank showing the unauthorized payout, the photos of the forged signatures, both the insurance change and the cremation form. I labeled each binder tab: banking, insurance, legal, and funeral. Under legal, I added a new section: Raymond's January 2024 will. The original, notarized, filed through Holloway Law. It named me as sole heir. No mention of Danielle. No mention of Maurice. When I turned around to retrieve my copies, Maurice stood 3 feet away, like a shadow that hadn't fully materialized. "You came to the library?" I asked without flinching. "Looking for a book?" He smiled, small and rehearsed. "Just wanted to talk." I tucked the binder into my bag without looking at him. "We said everything last time." He didn't move. "You're making this hard. For everybody." I zipped the case slowly. "Good. Maybe hard is what it takes to make y'all stop. We're your family." "Not anymore. Right now, your subject's in a file." Miss Rhonda glanced over from the help desk, watchful. I didn't have to say anything, just the angle of my body, the edge in my voice, and she understood. Community sees what family tries to hide. Maurice didn't push. He turned and walked out, empty-handed. I watched him go, then turned back to the scanner, 1 page at a time, patient, precise. They could lie. They could scheme. But they couldn't erase what was printed, signed, and filed. Paper doesn't blink. It remembers everything. The next day at noon, I walked through the wide double doors of Cornerstone Baptist's Fellowship Hall. The room smelled of wood polish and lemon cleaner, and the folding chairs were already set out in neat rows for Bible study later that evening. But today, the space was private. Just me, Attorney Angela Holloway, and Pastor Calvin Brooks. Angela stood near the window, flipping through my binder labeled Legal. She didn't speak right away, just nodded occasionally as she turned the pages. She was dressed sharply in gray slacks and a pale blue blazer, her reading glasses balanced low on her nose. When she reached the page with the side-by-side signatures, mine and the forgery, she finally spoke. "This isn't a mistake," she said. "This was deliberate." Pastor Brooks sat across from me, his palms folded over his knee. He was a tall man, not loud, but when he spoke, the words stayed with you. "I've known Raymond for 28 years, he said. "He came to me last fall worried about his children, said he didn't trust what they might do once his health declined." I nodded slowly. "He wasn't wrong." Angela looked up. "I've reviewed the 2024 will he filed with our office. You're named sole executor and heir. No contingent beneficiaries. No trusts. No riders. Danielle and Maurice aren't mentioned." I exhaled, steady, but slow. Angela continued. "We're filing a cease and desist letter today. Formal notice to Danielle and Maurice that they have no legal claim to the estate. After that, we move to revoke any financial or legal authorizations they've acted on, using false credentials." Pastor Brooks reached into the inside pocket of his coat and pulled out a pen. "If you need a legal witness for any statement," he said, sliding a notary form across the table, "I'll sign it. I've seen the way they've handled you. It's not just wrong." It's malicious. I signed slowly, every stroke of ink landing like the closing of a gate. Danielle's voicemail came through while we were still seated. You really called a lawyer on your own kids? We were trying to protect you. From yourself. I didn't respond. Some lies don't deserve an audience. By 5:15 p.m., I was seated inside Holloway Law's conference room, watching Angela slide the cease and desist letter into a stiff envelope with practiced hands. The room was quiet, save for the soft thump of legal paper meeting cardstock. Every surface gleamed. It smelled like ink, leather, and finality. Angela had dictated the letter herself, firm, precise, and unforgiving. It cited Raymond's will, the forged documents, the insurance redirect, and the unauthorized cremation. It ordered Danielle and Maurice to cease any representation of authority over Raymond's estate, finances, or remains. Copies were certified. Originals were ready for hand delivery. Once they're served, she said, you're under no obligation to respond to them. Block their numbers if you haven't already. I will, I said, pulling out my phone. Danielle's number, blocked. Maurice's, blocked. Angela nodded with approval. You've revoked every financial authorization. Next, we'll notify Sun Unity of the fraud with the forensic handwriting analysis we commissioned. That'll trigger an internal review. And Huntington? I asked. I spoke to Ms. Tate this morning. They're cooperating fully. The fraud case is active. The SSA's also been flagged. Your survivor's benefit is being secured under your sole account. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Angela glanced at me over her glasses. You did everything right, Mrs. Carter. My voice came out rougher than I meant. Took me long enough. Her tone softened. You caught it. That's what matters. I placed my hand over the final copy of the revocation paperwork, Raymond's durable power of attorney, which Danielle had once held by default when he was first diagnosed, was now nullified in full. We'd filed the form with the county clerk that morning, dated, stamped, delivered. Angela slid the envelope across the table. Want to be the one to drop it off? I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. I want it documented, she nodded. Courier will deliver it tonight. Signed receipt. As I stood to leave, my phone buzzed once more. Maurice this time. You're blowing up everything Dad built. You don't get to rewrite the past just because you're grieving. I didn't even open the message. Grief had nothing to do with it. The envelope arrived the next morning like an insult dressed in legalese. I found it tucked inside the black mailbox nailed to my porch rail, marked with a blue sticker and my name typed too neatly. The paper inside bore the Wayne County Probate Court seal. I unfolded the notice, my hands steady even as my stomach hardened. Petition for conservatorship. Filed by Danielle Carter. The affidavit ran 3 pages long, each paragraph more false than the last. Mrs. Carter has exhibited signs of grief-related paranoia and impaired judgment. Her emotional instability has caused erratic financial behavior, endangering the remainder of Mr. Carter's estate. She is no longer capable of managing her affairs. They were painting me as incompetent, mentally unfit, a confused widow lashing out at shadows, all so they could legally seize what hadn't already been stolen. This wasn't just retaliation, it was strategy, and they were counting on a system that often listened more closely to the young and polished than the old and prepared. But they'd miscalculated one thing. I wasn't confused, I was prepared. I folded the document slowly, placed it back into the envelope, and carried it inside like evidence from a crime scene. At the kitchen table, where I had eaten alone for weeks, where I had balanced bank statements and binder tabs, I opened a fresh legal pad and wrote down the court date. October 14th, Probate Room 3C, 10 a.m. Then I added, attending, me, Angela Holloway, Pastor Calvin Brooks. Evidence, fraudulent beneficiary form, cremation authorization, bank records, notarized will, audio recordings. They wanted to put me on trial? Fine. I would walk in holding every receipt and let their lies unravel under oath. An hour later, I drove down to the county clerk's office and filed my own affidavit. Calm, thorough, backed by facts. I included copies of the will, the revocation paperwork, and Holloway's official challenge. The clerk, a young woman with red nails and a sympathetic nod, stamped each page and handed me the docket copy. Good luck, Mrs. Carter, she said softly. I smiled, not wide, but sure. I won't need luck. I've got proof. Danielle thought she could win by pretending I'd lost my mind. But my mind was clear, and the courtroom would be too. October 14th arrived cold and dry, the sky overcast in that dull way only a Michigan fall can manage, like the city itself was withholding judgment. I dressed deliberately. Charcoal blazer, pearl earrings, black leather flats with a quiet shine. Not morning clothes, court clothes. Angela picked me up at 8:45 a.m. sharp, her car neat, her voice calm. We didn't talk much on the ride. There was nothing left to explain. She had my 4 binders packed in a rolling case beside her, labeled, color-coded, tabbed. Precision wasn't optional anymore. It was armor. Pastor Brooks met us on the courthouse steps, holding a manila folder and a worn Bible. He greeted me with a firm nod and no unnecessary words. We entered room 3C together at 9:48 a.m. Danielle was already there. She wore a soft ivory dress, pearls at her throat, and her hair pulled into a tight, polished bun. Mourning theater, grieving daughter, betrayed by a confused mother. Maurice sat beside her in a navy suit, lips pressed into a line so straight it might have been painted on. They didn't look at me. Judge Abrams entered at exactly 10. She was sharp-featured, brisk in manner, and known for tolerating no performance. The hearing opened with Danielle's attorney outlining her claims. Unusual behavior, financial mismanagement, emotional instability. She used phrases like concern for her well-being and preventative intervention. It was polished, too polished. Angela rose slowly, introduced herself, and rolled the cart to the center table. She began not with argument, but with evidence. The original 2024 will, notarized, filed, the fraudulent insurance form, wrong middle initial, screenshots of text messages, the forged cremation authorization signed by Danielle as spouse, security footage from the funeral home showing her submitting the paperwork, bank logs showing redirected funds, signed statements from the hospice nurse, my own ledger documenting over $62,000 in care expenses, Pastor Brooks's notarized witness form stating Raymond's intent and Danielle's absence during his final weeks. The room didn't erupt. It stilled. Danielle's attorney stammered, asked for time to review. The judge waved it off. We've heard enough to proceed. Angela closed the binder. Respectfully, Your Honor, the evidence speaks. And it did. Clear, documented, undeniable. Danielle whispered something to Maurice, but I didn't need to hear it, because the truth didn't require my defense anymore. It was standing all on its own. The air inside the courtroom shifted just after 11:30 a.m., not with volume, but with weight. The kind of hush that falls when the facts can no longer be bent, when performance gives way to proof. Judge Abrams leaned back in her chair, adjusted her reading glasses, and scanned the page before her with the deliberate pace of someone who understood the gravity of her next sentence. Angela remained still, her hands folded neatly on the binder labeled legal. Pastor Brooks sat beside me like a stone, present, anchoring. Danielle leaned forward slightly, one hand on the table, the other trembling in her lap. Maurice stared at the wall behind the judge like he wished it would open up and pull him through. Judge Abrams spoke with calm authority. This court finds that the petition for conservatorship was filed in bad faith, supported by misrepresentations and fraudulent documentation. Danielle's shoulders dropped. The court has reviewed verified audio files, witness testimony, banking logs, forensic handwriting analysis, and a notarized will. The evidence supports a pattern of elder coercion, financial misdirection, and falsification of legal documents. Angela passed me a tissue. Not because I cried, but because the truth has its own weight, and sometimes it rests in your eyes. Danielle whispered sharply, "She's framing us," then covered her mouth as if that slip might undo everything. But the judge had already moved on. The court hereby dismisses the conservatorship petition and transfers full authority over the estate and financial matters to Mrs. Renee G. Carter. She paused briefly. In addition, this court will refer the matter for further investigation into potential fraud by Danielle Carter and Maurice Carter. The estate will be reinstated in accordance with the January 2024 will. The court recorder's fingers danced over the keys, sealing it all in transcript. I didn't move, didn't smile, didn't gloat. Angela closed the final binder and stood. "Thank you, Your Honor." The judge nodded once and rose. Danielle remained seated, her face twisted in disbelief, and something close to rage. Maurice finally spoke, but only one word. "Wow." He said it not like surprise, but like defeat. As I gathered my things, I felt no triumph, only stillness. What had been broken was now set straight, and what they'd tried to bury had risen, page by page, until the court could no longer look away. I stood beneath a wide October sky, pale clouds drifting like pages not yet written. The chill in the air wasn't biting, but it carried a clarity I hadn't felt in months. Angela walked beside me, her coat open, her stride easy. Pastor Brooks trailed a step behind, still quiet but smiling now, just a little. A man from the court's legal services office met us at the base of the steps. He handed me a sealed folder. Final order of restitution. Estate title, Renee G. Carter. Insurance beneficiary, reinstated. Power of attorney, revoked and null. Beneath that, a separate slip. Fraud inquiry case hash WCP-2217. Names, Danielle Carter, Maurice Carter. I tucked it into my bag with care. Across the plaza, I saw Danielle being escorted out by courthouse security. Not in cuffs, yet, but surrounded by silence. She turned once. Her voice, sharp and defiant, cut through the open air. "You've left us with nothing." I didn't reply, because I hadn't taken anything. I'd reclaimed what was already mine. Angela didn't flinch. Pastor Brooks gave a soft under his breath, the sound of a man who'd seen storms pass and understood that not all justice is loud. We walked to my car, mine again, in full title, where the locksmith's receipt lay on the passenger seat, October 14th, 2025. 1:03 p.m., changed locks, 5123 Hickory Street, new keys issued. I turned the key in my hand, feeling the weight of it, a little heavier than before. Or maybe it just felt more real, now that no one could take it from me. When I reached home, the silence inside wasn't hollow anymore. It was earned. The old photo of Raymond and me still sat above the mantel, slightly off-center, as if waiting for me to notice. I adjusted it gently, balanced, even. Then I opened my purse and placed the court order beside the keys in the drawer under the phone, the drawer where important things live. I sat down at my dining table, now cleared of binders and bills. No parade, no applause, just quiet, just space, just peace. And peace, as I've learned, is not the absence of betrayal. It's the presence of boundaries, written, witnessed, and locked.